Hey guys, Chris here for Thomann Guitars and Basses. Welcome to Guitar Tech Tips Q&A number 6. Thanks a lot for all the awesome comments and questions. We love seeing them, so keep them coming. And also, if you enjoy these videos, please hit subscribe and ring the bell. Let's get into it. The first comment is from the Goat. Hey Goat. Question for Chris. If I tune my E standard guitar to drop D, it starts having fret buzz on only the low D string. Do I need to buy any heavier gauge D string or do something else? Thanks in advance. It really depends on a number of things. First of all, is it a fixed bridge guitar or is it like a floating trem of like a Strat type, like a traditional tremolo or maybe even a Floyd Rose? That of course changes stuff. Let's say it's a fixed bridge guitar. That amount of change in string pull, if you detune your E string, which is the thickest one, so that pulls the neck to the front the most, can already cause the neck to slightly tilt to the back, right? Because there's less pressure coming from the strings. So that could be a thing. You could, of course, check the neck relief if it's still fine, because that could, of course, already caused that fret buzz. There's one more thing to check, and that's the knot and the knot slot for that string, for that sixth string, because you loosen the string, right? You have less tension, and for that reason, the string moves wilder if you pick it. So if there's more movement, you get closer to the frets, obviously. It just vibrates like hell. If you want to avoid that, you could, of course, put 1 gauge thicker 6th string on your guitar if you drop tune a lot. Daniel Phillips. Hey man, been a Thomann customer for over a decade and this channel is awesome. Thank you so much. Just a novice on bass though, and I picked up the following entry-level guitar with the idea of leveling it up with some personal TLC. I was going to pay an experienced guitar tech to do this, but maybe I can do some things myself. Can you tell me what steps can I take to get this entry-level bass to the next level in terms of setup and playability? It's a Harley Benton JB75MN Natural. First of all, those basses are surprisingly good. I even like the pickups, so I would not necessarily swap them at the beginning. What you could do in terms of playability and upgrades, you could rewatch those videos we did at the beginning of this whole Guitar Tech Tips series, which were neck setup, like the truss rod, the nut setup or nut slot check, then the bridge setup and intonation, all these things, including the fret end filing. Like if you want to make them feel super smooth when you're sliding with your hands, that it feels really classy and expensive, these steps will make your bass feel as great as any other guitar bass in the world already. And it's doable. It's definitely doable. If you follow the steps on in those videos, I'm sure you will be able to do them. You'll find a playlist, of course, in the description box in case you missed those older episodes. The bridge is also great on these basses with the brass saddles and everything, so I wouldn't necessarily touch it. The pots could be better, of course. It's an entry-level bass, so if you want to improve the tone of the bass and the feel of the pots, you could go for some nice ones. If you're familiar with soldering electronics, it's not a huge thing and it doesn't cost the world. An X in Spanish, Xerman Pequeño. And I know this X is not an X.
Yeah, it's
it's like
more like an H.
Because there's like almost like D, like J, J. I will butcher your name. I'm so sorry. German Pequeño. I'm so sorry, man. Question for your next Q&A video. I have a 29 Gibson SG Special with P90s. The guitar is not hand wired. It has a PCB wiring instead. When I'm in the middle position, I cannot adjust each volume or tone individually. Both the neck and the bridge volume works as a master volume, and the same thing happens with the tone controls. If one volume is all the way off, both pickups are off. If one tone is all the way off, both pickups have all the tone rolled off. No blending sounds with both pickups are possible. Is my guitar wired incorrectly, or does this happen to all guitars with this type of PCB wiring? Thanks in advance. I'm not sure that the PCB wiring has to do anything with this. This effect is absolutely normal on Les Pauls. Let me show it on my guitar, which is hand wired. It's a normal, standard, traditional wiring, and still the same thing happens. This is both pickups active. And the bridge volume. I'm pretty sure you want to know why this is happening in the middle position of the switch. Well, in theory, it's really simple, but it takes some time to understand what's up. So if the toggle switch is in the middle, both pickups and both circuitries are active, right? So this is the volume and tone for this pickup, volume and tone for this pickup. Everything is connected and everything is active. The way volume pod works is that you add more and more of your signal to ground. What happens if ground goes on your hot signal, the guitar is going to be muted. So of course, as soon as you mute one of the pickups and put it completely to ground, well, you know what I mean, the whole circuitry is connected with the ground. So how on earth could any kind of sound come out of it? So that's the reason for that. It's very similar with the tone knobs as well, because the capacitor on the tone knob is also connected to ground, and you add more and more tone through that capacitor to ground. So it's a very similar thing, and one will affect the other pickup's tone as well. It's just how this wiring works. Mind Art Creativity wrote under the Harley Benton DIY mod video: if the guitar grooves are not the right size for 54 to 11 gauge strings, could that prevent correct intonation, or does it not matter for intonation? This is the first tech video that mentions bridge groove filing. Not everyone files the bridge saddles to the correct gauge, like string gauge that's sitting on that saddle. I've learned this from a couple of luthiers and started doing myself first on my own guitars, and then of course all guitars that get that kind of treatment and comes through my hands. I just love it because it works perfectly. I barely ever break strings at the bridge saddle since I'm doing that. So it just makes all the sense to do this instead of the V-shaped little carvings for the strings. It's just tuning stability is better and strings don't break. It doesn't have to do anything with the intonation though. The point where the string sits on that bridge saddle is pretty narrow still. So you have to move that saddle to the right position to adjust, like fine adjust the length of the string, and that is what matters. I'm talking about the ending point of that bridge saddle where the string starts to vibrate up until the nut. That is what matters. And for that, you will of course have to adjust that saddle to the point where the intonation works. So that doesn't have to do anything with that part. This next one is interesting and important, so let's check it out. Mihai Moldoveanu. Please mask the fretboard with masking tape before doing the work. This comment came under the complete fret leveling episode we had, the 50th anniversary episode. Never polish the frets with sandpaper with the fretboard not masked off. You will scratch your fretboard. Also, you should mark the fret tops with the marker before doing the crowning so that you ensure that you do not take off the tops of the frets. Also, I like to take the neck off when doing this, much easier to work with. I agree with each and every point you mentioned, Mihai. Thanks for the comment and thanks for watching your videos, even though you clearly know what you're doing. I'm guessing you're a professional guitar tech or someone who has a lot of experience with all these. All that you're saying is totally right, and I absolutely agree, and you should protect everything everywhere because it just makes a lot of sense, especially if you don't have a lot of experience with doing these steps, and especially if it's not your own instrument, because that's just not an option to scratch someone else's guitar. It's still, in reality, it all depends on the situation, on the type of guitar, and on the person who's doing it. I've seen respected guitar luthiers not protecting anything and not scratching anything ever. If you can do it, it's awesome. It's of course still better to be sure. There's one thing I don't completely agree on, and that's the mash pads, these micro mash pads, which are really smooth. Like they have like, the roughest one is like 1500 grit. So they're pretty smooth. And I've never scratched a fretboard with those if it's like an unfinished rosewood or ebony fretboard. It's of course, as told, better to be safe, but that's not the biggest issue. But other than that, if you can protect something, please do it. Next comment is from Andrew Clayton, and it's not really related to the Guitar Tech Tips format, but I wanted to address it anyhow. Amazing tips, thanks Chris. Right now I'd love to come up with a question. Usually I'm using combos, and now I decided to go for heads plus cabinets separated. But for a typical combo enthusiast, it's hard to get it nailed. And the question is about matching impedance and watts and all that kind of stuff. Actually, we did a video on the subject with Colin Scott from CS Guitars, a good friend of mine, and we made that in, I think, 2019 at the Thomann Gearhead University. I'll put the video in the description box under this video, so you'll find it. Check it out. If you still have questions, don't hesitate, of course, hit us up. Username of the year goes to Nuetari666 Uzgursmur. Is there a difference in sound if the knot is narrower or wider? Is the knot also responsible for string ringing behind the knot? First question, no. Second question, partially yes. So if it's narrower or wider, doesn't mean anything, it's just a comfort thing. One feels more comfortable, especially with bigger fingers or a huge hand. If the knot is wider, you have more space per string, and some prefer the vintage, more narrow spacing on electric guitars especially. And the second question, if the knot is responsible for the strings vibrating behind the knot, partially yes, but it's also the design of the guitar. So let's say this is your guitar. Oh, it's heavy. Wait, we'll make this happen. So, this is a guitar with an angled headstock. You will not have any chance for these strings to vibrate behind the knot, because the knot is basically pushing the strings up, right? So here's enough big break angle, and that just works. You will not have any issues with that. If this was a Fender or any similar guitars with a straight headstock, this angle is way flatter. That's why you will need a string retainer or a string tree or anything that sort of pushes the strings enough into the knot slot. Because if it's not enough tightly sitting in the slot, then the string will start to vibrate behind the knot. That's the thing. Fly Free Jag V. Hi, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I changed the first string and keeps popping out of the tremolo. It seems that it's not pressing strong enough the string to keep it in place. Any suggestions? I'm guessing it's gonna be a Floyd type tremolo, because that's the only kind of trem where you lock the end of the string into the tremolo. So you have these little blocks, right, that sit inside that little cavity where you stick the end of the string in. And then you have to lock that little block with a screw and push it against the string. That's what keeps the string stable in the tremolo. If that block is sitting upside down or turned like 90 degrees or whatever, that can already cause an issue. So there's a groove on all of these little blocks for the screw that's supposed to push it against the wall where the string sits in the middle. And if the groove is not in the right spot, that could be an issue. Or maybe it sits in the right position, it's just scratched and used and it cannot hold the string. It's not an issue. You can find these little blocks, you can buy one, like a replacement one, and then it's all good. Leon C. I'd like to know how to install a string tree on a headstock of a guitar with a Floyd Rose system. How to screw in the screws without ruining the finish. Yeah, it's more like two questions. First of all, if you have a guitar with a Floyd Rose trem that will have a locking nut. Behind this locking nut, like nothing is really necessary, because the locking nut will lock the strings right in there. If the headstock angle is too flat and the strings don't even sit inside the grooves of that locking nut, if you open the nut, then you probably want to have something like a string retainer bar, something like that. You will see on most of the floating bridge loaded guitars, like Ibanez guitars, whatever, most of these modern type guitars, it's a metal bar that sits behind the nut and it pushes the strings down. For that you will need 2 screws, and now we arrive to the second half of your question, how to drill holes in finished surfaces. You have to be really careful, and you have to use metal drill bits, because the head of a drill bit that's made for metal has this flat angle and doesn't have crazy carving little things. So when that turns, you have a sort of a subtle way of going through the finish and then some wood to prepare the slot or the hole for the screw. I would even recommend using like a table drill, like a real stable one, or just be super careful because it can slide off a finished headstock, for example, and just scratch it. Or yeah, you have to be really cautious when you're doing that. And also you can sort of mark with something that's sharp and pointy where you want to drill that little hole for the screw, and just sort of make little circle movements or groove it in just a little bit to help position that drill bit when you're going for it and drilling the hole. Last question of the day is from Tuana Hamawandi. This versus Tremol-No. This came under the video we did on the Tremmory, which is another way of stabilizing your floating tremolo. So the way I see it is they're really different. The Tremol-No is more like yes or no, black or white kind of unit. So you can leave your trem open in both directions, pull and push. Or you can decide to go for dive only, which means you can only push it down and then it's completely blocked if you want to pull it. Or you can fix the bridge, you can block it in both directions, and then it's like if you didn't have a Floyd on your guitar or a Strat tremolo, like a traditional tremolo. So that's like more like yes or no, right? And the Tremmory is a bit more subtle. It still allows you to use your tremolo, but you don't have to worry about one string going out of tune if you bend another string, or if you want to drop the 6th string, you can do it, and you can still get away with the other 5 strings not going that much out of tune. You can still play a gig with a guitar like that. You don't have to tune all the 6 strings, which is a big advantage. So it's more of a subtle stabilization if we're talking about the Tremmory, and as told, the Tremol-No is like the yes or no kind of mod. You have a fully floating, dive only, or a full fixed bridge. Depends on what you expect from them. I don't see a better or worse in this little competition. And on that bombshell, right? That was the
Top gear.
Yeah. And on that bombshell, it's time to end this episode. Thanks a lot for all the awesome comments and everything. As told, keep them coming. We'll see each other down there in the comment section. You guys take it easy. Don't be afraid of setting up and fixing your guitars yourself. It's time to become your own guitar tech. Bam!
Launch.
iPad drop! No.